started in Logic and then I moved over to the other side.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. But Logic has now got spatial audio. I think it's got Dolby embedded in it now.
You might be right.
Yeah, I haven't checked it out, but yeah, exciting stuff. So is this your first year, last year students?
First year.
First year students. Cool. Are your music production as well?
Mm.
And cool. And what kind of stuff do you make?
Pop.
Nice. And do you just work with other vocalists, or do you?
Mostly myself. I'm first and foremost I'm a vocalist, so yeah, mostly myself.
Cool.
What about yourself? What do you tend to do?
So using Ableton, some my stuff is kind of IDM loosely, so it's kind of like Max Cooper, John Hopkins, rival consoles inspired stuff. So like a long time ago I did vocals on my first album, but actually decided that was a bad idea. So now I just do non-vocal stuff, but I do sometimes use vocal samples. So it's really good to have had that experience of sort of recording yourself and being able to take stuff and then manipulate samples.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty much in that vein. So it's anything from quite sort of soundscapey avant-garde stuff to stuff that's a little bit more beat driven. I guess.
It's quite popular at the moment, that sort of thing, isn't it?
Is it? Oh great! I'm on the right bandwagon. Amazing.
Well, I've seen they sort of attribute it to people that are studying and that want music without distracting them with lyrics.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so it's always like Spotify friendly, maybe.
Yeah, for some people.
Yeah.
Definitely like lo-fi, like that. That's kind of vibe.
Down tempo stuff.
Yeah.
It's like piano albums, really. It's like, lots of cafes are just going to put on a Spotify playlist.
Yeah.
So it's really interesting that what Spotify perceives as popular is not necessarily what you actively want to listen to. It's sometimes what you passively just want to consume. Yeah, it's a really good point. So yeah. And what about yourself? What kind of stuff do you do?
I like a sort of funky sort of rock stuff, but a bit of hip hop. I mean, I like a lot of different genres and different elements of it. So trying to learn as much as I can, really, and not be too pigeonholed in one thing.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Across the board.
Yeah, trying. Jack of all trades, good at none.
I feel the same. Yeah. But as you'll see.
Is it okay if we turn off the lights?
Yeah.
Everything's fine here.
Okay. I mean,
are we ready to go?
We're even streaming.
we are ready to go. Is this going to ruin the streaming?
No.
Okay.
That's good.
Always adjusted.
Cool. Great. So first of all, thank you so much to Paul and ACM for inviting me here today. So just to give a little bit of my background, as already mentioned, I'm an electronic music producer and live AV artist. I'm not actually a visual designer myself, so I work with a group of artists internationally to create work. A lot of them work in quite innovative styles, so they work in generative or procedural coding styles of art, which is how one of them has treated that photograph on the right. And as mentioned, I tend to work in sort of loosely IDM, so it's anything from quite abstract soundscapes to more beat-driven tracks. I tend to think of my projects as working at the intersection of art, music and technology. In 2020 I launched sort of loosely something called the New Worlds Project, so it's sort of a lot of different projects and a lot of them are innovation-led projects under that banner, and that's when I started self-releasing as well. So prior to that, just as a quick background, about 8 years ago I was at Point Blank, which is where I studied music production and sound engineering. This is where I occasionally had a lesson from Paul, and also Justin Lindley, who's here now, also taught me mixing and sound engineering. I also work with mixed reality visuals. I don't do that so much now because I work with companies who do that for me, but I've bought something here, a Connect here, just to explain how you can do that. I guess the purpose of today is sort of to try and, I'm going to show you a few things that I do, but it's really just to inspire people to look at DIY ways of accessing immersive technologies. So immersive is a word that's just really hot right now. As immersive technologies are exploding, you'll see lots of immersive shows coming up. So a lot of the time it looks like it's very technical and you need huge setups, but actually a lot of the software is now becoming more and more accessible. So I'm going to show you some of the things I do, but it's just supposed to be a point for you to maybe go out if you're interested and investigate your own solutions. So I'm massively inspired by a range of things. So on the sort of musician side, this is a picture of Rival Consoles at one of his concerts. He programs his visuals here in Max MSP. So I really like the way that audio and music, so audio and visuals can work together. I'm also inspired on the sort of art side by installation work. So this is an artist called Ryoji Ikeda. He did an installation called Test Pattern, which has been around the world, but it also was in London for a little while, so I had a chance to experience it. And in that you've got these kind of really strong projectors projecting barcodes on the ground, and you've got some almost like noise that seems to coincide with the bar pattern, the barcode patterns. So it creates this illusion of the two elements working together. And people come to the installation, you take your shoes off, and then you can kind of actually get involved. So you become part of that installation. So I really like the idea that it moves people out of their day-to-day. And this is a group of artists called United Visual Artists, produce a lot of stuff using just light. So they often use a really dark room as a sort of their blank canvas. And in this instance, I think they're just using some layers of mesh and some laser lighting to create this really cool, constantly moving geometric pattern. But you can see it's almost a bit like an alien landing. There's people kind of absorbing there, but when you go and watch it, you're just sort of somewhere else for a minute because you come into a completely darkened space in order to experience it. So I guess I'm quite inspired by people who create experiential pieces of work. I started gigging around 2016, generally just sort of around the London circuit, so there's quite a lot of interesting small groups who cater to DIY music producers and AV enthusiasts, and often your audience are other people who are also working in technology, so it's kind of interesting to be there, share ideas, and also maybe do collaborations. So here, at this point, I was working with a guy I met there called VJ Mowgli. He was programming, these are actually Max visuals, which I was serving at that point through a piece of software called Resolume. So I would be working in Ableton, and when I triggered my tracks, that would send a little piece of OSC code over to Resolume to start the visuals going. And as you can see, Ableton at that point had become kind of central to my setup. So generally speaking, for the audio, I'll just use a MacBook and bring a push 2 out with me. So the big start for me in terms of immersive almost came a little bit by chance. I was invited sort of through a network contact to play a show at Abbey Road Studios, which sounds impressive. It was actually part of a hackathon event. So they had a lot of people actually working on music applications in the room. People like Facebook were there with sort of Facebook Spark and various other applications. So I was working with a visual artist called Jan Patirik, who I still work with, and we just decided to quite quickly hack together a sort of 5-track set, and Jan was manipulating some visuals, which I think at that point he was building in a program called Blender. But the interesting thing for me was who I met on for that event. They had a company called L-Acoustics in the room. L-Acoustics, for those who don't know, L-Acoustics is one of the huge speaker manufacturers and providers for really big arena events. So if you've been to a big arena concert, almost undoubtedly it's either L-Acoustics or D&B who are supplying those speakers. L-Acoustics have an innovation lab called L-Acoustics Creations, which is actually, although they're a French company, it's based in North London. And they had provided to Abbey Road Studios for this event a ring, I think it was about 23 speakers around the room, and they were encouraging the couple of artists who were playing, which I was one, to reprogram their set in spatial sound. And I really had no interface with spatial sound before then. So I went along to their studios, and with the support of their engineers, actually just in a few days, we managed to translate the set into spatial sound. At that point, in order to do that, in order to hear how you're influencing the various sound objects, I had to be in a studio with ring speakers, which is obviously impractical then for most producers to have at home. Most people are not going to have that set up. Actually, in 2021, they released something called Elisa Studio, which again you can also do with the Dolby Atmos renderer, is it'll provide you with a binaural output, so you can just be in your home studio, put on the headphones. It's never a perfect rendition of what's actually going to happen in a space, but it gives you an idea of what's going to happen. So this was quite exciting for me. It was my first experience of working with spatial sound, and I'm always a bit of a sucker for new ideas and innovation, and I was just like, oh, this is another palette, another dimension that I can play with for events. So at that point though, that was the end of 2019, so obviously 2020 we went into lockdown, so there wasn't much of an opportunity to be using spatial sound in real world environments. So at that point we just sort of take a step back, and I was starting to release my own tracks, and I wanted to do something with the releases that made them a little bit interesting when I performed them. And I'd been really inspired. I went to the Ableton Loop conference in Berlin in 2017, and I'd seen a guy called Nosaj Thing, a producer called Nosaj Thing, along with a visual artist called Daito Manabe, and they were standing together at a desk like this in front of a huge screen. And I couldn't understand it because they could see a sort of outline of them being projected into the visuals, but it was sort of spinning. They were spinning around in space, and I could tell all the actions were real time. I was like, how the hell can they be manipulated? It looks like cameras are spinning around them, but I can't see any spinning cameras. And what I sort of realised afterwards in sort of studying the video was actually what they're using was 3 Kinect cameras. So obviously Kinect is a bit of a defunct technology as it stands now, but but the concept is still very sort of alive and well. But what it does is infrared, approximately. It's mapped your body and can recreate a sort of 3D mesh. And what Daito Manabe had done is taken 3 of them and somehow mapped them together in a project to give an impression of a 3D environment, and to do that live and map it into what we guess is a Unity 3D environment. So Unity 3D, for those who don't know, is a gaming engine. A bit like Unreal Engine would probably be another big gaming engine. So you can kind of obviously create 3D environments and then map the information from Kinect into those environments. So I got kind of excited about, I'd just like to try that, don't know why. But Jan, who I was working with, was working in Unity 3D, so he started building some sort of spacey videos. And just to show you a little bit of how that video, how some of those environments looked. So they had a 3-dimensional quality, and we're thinking, how could we bring me into that environment and then maybe perform it out live in a live stream? So I bought a Kinect off eBay and had to find another company to basically map that information into a Unity file, which we could then use to build lots of different Unity environments in order to, oh, that's interesting, it hasn't actually, oh, there we go. To have me. And so very, very quickly, I'm just going to switch and just show you a little bit of how that works. Hopefully this is going to, just takes a second for this to switch. Switching. Okay. Ah, no, it's taking me back to the. Number 2. Okay, here we go. So what we're looking at just here is OBS. So people often use that as a streaming technology, and so I was using it for streaming. I now use it to serve graphics in live performance. And what I'm doing just here is serving a Unity display, and I'm just going to show you one of the Unity projects. Should open up, and if I stand here, there we go. So what's happening here is the Kinect is picking up a sort of skeleton of me, and then Jan has sort of, and the company we were working with has applied some rotating effects So yeah, so it's kind of like an interesting sort of spacey thing, but you can also see that it's rotating, so it has a 3D quality. Because I've only got one, I've not got three like Data and Nabe, then it's only seeing one part of me, so the rest of me is effectively hollow. But it's kind of enough to sort of have a 3D object of some interest. And it was kind of nice just to start experimenting with that and just using it for sort of abstract purposes. So, you know, I don't do anything massively interesting when I'm playing live because I'm just playing live with Ableton Push. And it was an interesting way just to stream me rather than, you know, a lot of people using green screens and stuff like that during the event. So it's just something different. And interestingly, it got a lot of interest, particularly from like music tech people and music tech blogs, and was interviewed by people like Sonic State, just because people were like, oh, how does that work? That's an interesting idea. And then it sort of inspired people to go, oh, but what if you did this? What if you did that? So it's a fairly basic way of doing mixed reality. But it just shows you can kind of get started with a £100 Kinect camera. So let's go back to the screen. Yes.
Sorry, can I just
Yeah.
ask you, is that reactive to the audio in any way?
No, it isn't. It's just reactive to me, but Kinect does have a microphone in it, so maybe it could be. Maybe it could. And the piece altogether isn't reactive, but we could have built something like in Unreal Engine that in Unreal actually we did build one track that was audio reactive, so that when I played out live, if there was a big hit, it would just sort of like muss up everything that I did. Yeah. So then it came to 2021, and you know, finally the world was opening up. It looked kind of safe enough to start booking events again, and I was really keen. You know, I had all of this stuff to do with visuals. I had the spatial sound that I'd been working with when I met Acoustics at Abbey Road, and also a few years back I'd learned a little bit about programming lights in DMX. Is a language that lights have to program. And both the spatial sound and the lights you can actually program using Ableton Automation. And I'm going to show hopefully a short demo of that a little bit later. So I applied for an Arts Council grant, and I was lucky enough to receive one. And that helped me stage my kind of first vision of what I saw as an immersive event. So I hired the Copeland Gallery, just like it's December in 2021. So it actually turned out to be completely the wrong time, because COVID was kind of coming back again, and people were cancelling all over the place, and suppliers kept kind of dropping out. So it was a bit of a nightmare, but we managed to get it done. So that was a combination of the graphics that I'd produced, whether it was the Unity stuff with mixed reality, whether it was some stuff I was doing with another designer that was procedural coding, which is what you can see there, and the lighting. And here I was hiring from a production company. These are Astera pixel tubes, and they're wireless, but they're surprisingly easy to actually control through Ableton Automation. You can make a show where, if it's all bespoke and you've spent time on it, people can really tell that it's a sort of cohesive experience. So that we received lots of compliments on that, compliments on using the spatial. And this is our sound engineer then. So yes. So just to show you, sort of, there's a lot of clearly hardware to operate that in a real life situation. So it is you can rig up your own spatial system without quite so much of the sort of Star Trek Enterprise in the background. So moving on from that was end of 2021. There were a few experiments through that year using spatial sound at various venues, and then I had the opportunity to play a show at Earth in Hackney, which you may know as a venue. It's a 700 capacity venue, which is an old theatre that's been sort of reconditioned and done up. And Acoustics actually have their own in-house system there. So they have a 17.1.8 system. So what that means is you've got these 5 quite powerful arrays to the front of you, you've got 4 speakers to each side of you, 4 speakers at the back of the audience, and 8 overheads. So for me, that's like a big palette to play with. It's kind of quite exciting for an artist just to be allowed to kind of run free with that as a sort of technology to play with. Yeah, so I'm going to just show you a 1-minute video of what that looked like. You'll be able to see kind of where the speaker placements, spot the speaker placements around the room, and also see a little bit of how what we were trying to do was match the lighting with the speaker placement, but just to give you an idea. Quite a journey really to come from, so it took about sort of 9-10 months to come from Copeland Gallery to being able to play in Earth. This is just an example of the software that I was using. So this is the Elisa by Acoustics software. It's equivalent, like you probably heard from Immersive a lot about Dolby. Dolby tend to have a sort of stranglehold, maybe I should say, on Spatial. People often use Dolby Atmos as a byword for Spatial because they have a deal with Apple. They've always been in recorded music and cinematic presentations. So Dolby is almost like first choice for people to mix often spatial audio. Acoustics is slightly different. They come from a live perspective. So Elisa is almost an identical kind of software to use. And you'll find it being used at, for instance, the Adele residency at Las Vegas at the moment will be using an Elisa immersive setup. So actually my on-stage setup is over here, but I am going by an Ethernet cable into front of house. So I've pre-programmed all of this software, and all of these little blobs on here represent sound objects. So I've decided that for each track there might be something like between 10 and 15 stems for that track, and they might be either mono sound sources or stereo sound sources. I've decided where they are in the auditorium, and I can also automate them to move around the auditorium using the software. I pre-programmed that because there's sort of too much to think about in a performance to also be moving stuff, but some people do move spatial stuff live. This is also just to show another good use for spatial, some other uses of spatial sound. This was a church in Berlin. We did a show in September. As you can see, we're going to have people in the mezzanine and downstairs, but you can see it's quite an awkward space because you kind of can't get the sound from downstairs into the mezzanine level. So actually within that space we had a ring of 6 acoustics speakers in the mezzanine and 8 on the ground floor, and we were effectively giving them this. This is something I did just a couple of weeks ago as a metaverse concert. So it's mentioned in a non-live environment. And in fact, yesterday I went in and recorded a 12-track spatial rendition of that set, and then we'll match it back to the volumetric recording, so it's almost like I was overdubbing myself. And then what can happen is when you're in the space, you can actually, literally like it was as live, walk near the speakers and hear what audio is coming out of which speakers. It's all a bit of innovation, etc. So not quite sure how that's going to be, how it's going to sound. But it's but as I said, I'm always kind of interested in the new stuff and sort of what's coming around. And virtual reality, I really feel is going to be Sorry. Why is it taking me forward? That's very weird. Oh, sorry. So this was how that looked. Sort of, it's growing and exploding as a topic, and it's going to have a lot of applications in the future. Sorry about this. Oh, apologies. Sorry. I don't know why I was doing this. It might just be best if I just go out this way. Okay. At this point, I'm just going to talk, if we've got time, just a little bit more technically about what is immersive audio. Some of you might know a lot about this already, but basically you've got mono audio sources. We know it's just a single source of audio. Audio, in some senses, is a form of spatial audio because you're providing two mono sources which are actually giving you the impression of sound moving in space. So we could say it's an early form of spatial sound. Surround sound, things like 5.1, 7.1 systems, are definitely moving towards immersive sound. Is a bit of a philosophical shift away from that, where you're saying it's actually speaker setup agnostic. So it's not you that decides which speakers the sound is going to come out. You're going to decide where you want that sound to be, and then you're going to allow the processing software to look at the speaker setup and then give the best solution to give the impression that sound is coming from that particular direction. So that's known as object-based mixing, and as those speaker outputs intersect, the sound appears to come from an assigned coordinate. So the idea with object-based mixing is also that if I decide a sound is going to be over here, for instance, it doesn't matter if I've got 6 speakers or I've got 6 speakers here and 8 speakers in a concentric circle up here in elevation, or I've got 50 odd speakers sort of filling the room. The processing software is going to approximate and decide what volume of that sound needs to come out of what speakers in order to give the impression that that sound is there in space. So what happens with object-based mixing is I put that into a file, and then that file can actually be unwrapped into any format. So it could be into a cinema system, it could be into a headphone system, or another speaker system. So very quickly you could change it from a 4-speaker system to a 50-speaker system. There are lots of different softwares. So as mentioned before, Dolby Atmos is one software that everybody sort of associates with spatial at the moment. But it's really good to be aware that there are others. So obviously I use Elisa by Acoustics, which is coming, as I said, from a live music direction. There's also independents like Spat Revolution is people would say is a pretty good tool. I've not used it myself, and I briefly used Envelope, which is sort of a bit more open source like Max MSP device, and that you can very easily download and play with yourself. So today we'll be looking at Elisa by Acoustics, and as I say, I use that in conjunction with Ableton Live, but you don't have to use it. It's not the only solution. You know, I thoroughly encourage people to go and find what's suitable for what. It will consist of things like the azimuth or pan. So that says if here is in the front of me from the auditorium, and just by the way, this is a snapshot of the software. If you imagine the guy you're looking at from above is facing towards the front of the auditorium. That's sort of saying that's the sort of the top of your panning, and you can pan to the left and you can pan to the right. So there's pan data that you can attach to that object. You can actually talk about elevation, because you might have flown speakers. So you might have some speakers that are horizontal to your horizontal plane. You might have some speakers up here, so you can give it elevation data. Distance is an interesting one because distance is the sort of illusion of distance. So in some sense, it could just mean if I say I want my stuff to be further away, the software might just turn it down as it gets further away. But also in some softwares, including Elisa, you can ascribe a reverb. So as you push your object away, it gets more and more reverby, and you can choose, like you can in any sort of door, large walled church or something is one that I've used as standard. And width data, and you can see the little orange objects at the top, so each of those is a piece of audio. Where you've got the lines sticking out the side, it's saying, not only do I want my object to be here, I actually want that sound to be spread across, and you can spread it across, you know, a prescribed amount of speakers. Generally speaking, we try and keep it just positioned just really clearly, and ideally snap to the speakers where we can. But it could be like just some big synth sound or something you could spread across a number of speakers and just be sort of moving gently. This is just to show that's what that scenario looks like. Just to imagine, because that's obviously a 2D picture of a 3D space. What you're actually doing is looking down on, in ELISA, it's a hemisphere. So your coordinates as you go up in elevation are doing this effectively. In Dolby, it's a little bit different. In Dolby, you'll see in the renderer, it's actually a cube. So these two, you can't actually translate. Annoyingly, this is an interoperability issue. You can't just sort of hit a button to take your coordinates from Dolby software into ELISA at the moment, that you might be able to in the future, because one is built on a curves and the other one is built on a box, effectively. So just to reiterate what I was talking about, what's different between stereo mixing and what's and object-based mixing. Stereo mixing, you're mixing for a left and a right channel. You're thinking about your speaker presentation of your sound as you're mixing. Object-based is a bit different. As mentioned, you've got all your little audio objects. Then the controller is where you input all of that metadata. So where is that thing? How high is it? How far away is it? Is it spread across speakers, etc.? And then the processor is taking the audio and saying, okay, I'm going to make a calculation of, you said you want those two sounds and that one's moving across there, so that speaker needs to have a bit of this sound and a bit of that sound, and then it turns down. So it's doing all of that kind of complicated calculations for you to approximate the programming that you've done. So just now, I'm just very quickly, and hopefully this works with a little bit of an issue setting up, oh, sorry, yes.
Hey, how do you prepare for this live?
So as mentioned, it's pre-programmed. So this is probably able to show you just now. So in fact, by talking through this, hopefully that answers your question. It's very apt. So let's imagine this is my Ableton file. What I'm looking at here is effectively one track. So for those of you familiar with Ableton, this is in session view. I have stemmed my track into all of the audio objects that I think are relevant to place separately. So it could still be that you've got a few things together. So sometimes with my percussion, I put it all in, some elements of percussion all in one stem. But there's still enough difference so that I've got maybe one synth that's doing one thing, I can make another synth do another thing. So you can see there's about, I think it's about 16, 17 tracks that's stems that I've bounced already. So if I play them all at the same time, they actually represent a whole track. So that's my mono pick there. So they're either mono tracks or sometimes stereo tracks. So what happens with ELISA is in terms of the stereo tracks, you're actually saying there's two mono objects here, a left and a right. So I could put my left on one side and my right on the other side of the auditorium, for instance. So do I have to switch off Wi-Fi for this to work? Yes.
Let's find out. No, because we've been all right, haven't we, with the playback coming on Dante, so it should be fine.
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay, fine. So the first thing we're going to do is, first of all, just say there's a couple of bits of software that you need, and you can get these for free from L-Acoustics as a trial. I think you can get Dolby's free as well as a trial. So I mentioned there's the controller that deals with all the metadata and the processor that's making all the calculations of where objects are going. So let's just have a look. I showed you before the soundscape. What these grey things represent is the speakers. So what we're looking at now, roughly, is the speakers in this room. So if you're the audience here, this is this speaker, which is sort of front and centre. These two speakers are those two there. These two are those rear two, and that back speaker is over there. I've particularly chosen just to have, you can have any speaker layout you like, really. I've just chosen this today just because it's just a sort of basic thing, and also Particularly for beat-driven tracks, I sort of prefer to have a mono kick and bass still, which is fairly traditional for playing out electronic music, I guess. So what you can see here is all these little blobs here represent one audio object, and I've told the Elisa controller to expect these. I've programmed them into this area where I've added what they're calling sources. So there's my mono kick, my mono snare, and then I've got this sort of snare repeater, which is a stereo object. What this indicates is you can actually stereo link or unlink tracks. So 3 and 4 are actually 2 outputs on a stereo track, so I kind of want them to be stereo linked. Also, just to show you the speaker setup, so you can kind of have a look in a 3D way at how your speakers are set up, and manage all your routing from here. Okay, so coming back to your door, got all my stems. I'm also going to make sure that I'm going through the Elisa audio bridge, because that's the way that the processor will receive the information. You can see that each of these tracks is set to outputs, which are the outputs I've programmed into the sources list for Elisa to be looking out for. And on every single one of the tracks as well is this Elisa source plugin. So you can control audio objects through either plugins. You can control them using snapshots, which is a way that you might see these on audio desks and lighting desks. I find it easier to use plugins and automation, but again, it's not the only way to do it. So you can see that the kick here, this audio object, is actually going to come out here, all being well. So yeah. So I've actually taken one track out at the moment, but I'm just going to play you the sort of backing almost track at the moment. Let's see what happens when I do. So this is all the objects together. Oh, we found a bit of crackling, so apologies for that. We're not quite sure why, but it may disappear in a So if I come in here to my envelopes, you can see I think it was that one, 13 and 14, wasn't it? 13 and 14? Yes. In fact, let's just play that track. So you can see that what it's doing is following the automation in Ableton. And you can do that with any of your data. So you can do that with distance. You can push sounds away, come back. Elevation, you can push sounds up or just place them up. Doesn't have to move. Sorry, Paul.
No, just quickly. So it's kind of interesting because if you that movement that it was doing at the moment is representing kind of like a back and forth movement in the front. But if you wanted to do a full 360, the automation kind of looks like a would look almost like a reverse sawtooth, wouldn't it?
Yeah,
So-
exactly. You suddenly have to drop down and then
But that,
pick up to the
does
top.
work though in terms of.
Yeah,
in
you can
terms of
just
spreading
keep
that,
spinning it around. And interestingly, I think the software producers are, at the moment it's finicky actually in Ableton to do it that way, and it might not be the way I always, might not be the best workflow forever. There are people also making intuitive tools for programming, because you can record it in live as automation as well. But you know, it might just be that you can actually describe motions in the air with a Miu glove or something. Yeah. Okay. So that gives you an idea of how those things relate to each other. And I don't know if I don't know how we are for time, but
I think we've done time.
yeah. What I was going to do was just very quickly take you through the process of adding something into the Elisa software. So if this is my Vox, which has had nothing done to it. I'm going to say, okay, that's external out. I'm going to use the next two outputs, which should be 31 and 32. I'm going to add to it Elisa source plugin. I'm going to, now at the moment, everything's taken up, all of these other tracks are taken up, which is why they're greyed out. So I have to tell the Elisa controller to look out for Vox on 31 and 32. So I'm just going to add this, Vox L and Vox R. I can give these a colour if I want to match my Ableton planning. I'm also going to say, okay, at the moment this is being controlled by snapshot. I don't want to control by snapshot, I want to use the plugin. So I'm going to select, this is pan, width, depth, elevation, and that's actually an aux out. So now it knows where it should be taking information from. If I then go back to the plugin, you can see VoxL and VoxR has appeared, so I can give it that information. So it's immediately seeing the objects in the soundscape. So let's just have a look at those. Let's take that off. Let's just visually send them again. And that's there. Okay, let's just work with this for a second. So what I'm going to do is just separate out. So this is 31, so this is my left channel and my right channel of a stereo track. But what I sort of want to do is keep them a bit separated, but I actually want to maybe move them all around the soundscape. So I'm going to start with 31 here and 32, which is the right side there. I'm going to go back into my plugin. So I'm starting with pan L, pan left, so this is 31. I'm going to move it from 16 up to, not quite sure where, let's imagine, let's go to 37 or something. See what happens when I play that. So let's just try playing. So that should be okay. So it's moved a little bit, but not far enough. I want it to go right down. Let's move it to 60. Let's try that again. And it being Ableton, you can then just sort of copy that automation. Whoops. Let's do that again. And then I think, okay, I probably like I want the right one to follow the left one around. So I think this is going to work. So if I go pan to pan R, I'm going to put that in. So at the moment, pan R, so 32, will actually be following left precisely, so it's going to be in precisely the same place. Computers do all that stuff, don't they?
It was linking it through the plugin on Ableton.
Ah.
It needed to do.
Sorry. Oh, hang on a minute. The automation got lost as well. you know what, I'm going to switch it off because it should be if I stereo link them and then unlink them and then add a bit, then it would have recognised them both together. Let's try switching that off. So let's just stereo link them for a minute as we come on. So it should be. What's that? Yes, it is. And now I'm actually gonna. I could just program Panel and let it do the work, but I'm just going to demonstrate how that works with Panel R. So yes. Lost it. Apologies. Let me come back.
You still might be able to paste it in.
Yeah, slimy.
So it might be still in your yeah.
Oh right, it might still be on the
Yeah, it
clipboard,
might be
yeah.
still on the clipboard.
Now I'm unlink. But it's both selected. Okay. Let's see. Panel, maybe.
Yay.
Yes. Okay. Panel. Put that in, and let's select all of it and raise it a bit and just see whether that might actually effectively sort of give it some separation. Programming, but yeah, you can have complete control over all of your sound objects. Okay, so just going back to the presentation again, near there. So programming lights I mentioned. Just to say briefly, so these are the stereo pixel tubes. Sorry, yeah.
Good question. When you're creating one of these projects, what are you monitoring? Have you got like a setup like this, or are you going to do it?
So this is so as mentioned earlier. So with Elisa Studio, which is what they released in 2021, you can have a binaural monitor of it, which means it will just give you any headphones are fine for it, and it'll give you an impression of where things are moving. It'll never tell you exactly what it's going to be like in the space, but it's good enough for you to do it at home without having to have hundreds of speakers around you. Yeah, I mean, the absolute dream would be to have a studio like they have in Acoustics, which has got everything there. But it's the same with programming audio generally. Once you get to a live space, it's always a little bit different from how it is when you're sort of monitoring it in a studio. So programming lights, you can actually get lighting visualizers, so you don't have to have the lights with you. It works on a really similar principle, except the language you're using is DMX. This is an example of a controller. It's called DMXis. So what happens is you put that on a track. So one of my tracks will be lighting, and it's just a long piece of automation. And it will have multiple channels, and the different channels tell the lights different things to do. So one might tell it to pan, one might tell it to tilt, one switches on, one might tell it to strobe. So you have to program those in. Again, it's quite a lot of work to be doing it that way. But if you do it all,
what's your output interface? Do you have to go to a desk, or do you have a separate?
Yeah, you get a little hardware box. So there's a little DMXis interface that'll go out to either 3-pin or 5-pin.
And that's just on just a USB box.
Yes, exactly that. And with the stereo lights, they're wireless, so you have a little wireless transmitter you get when you hire them, and then you can mount your lights anywhere around, even a really big room, and it kind of looks really impressive.
Well, I mean, so we've got DMX sockets in the electric theatre.
Okay.
So presumably a student could run a DMX automation.
Yeah.
Go just put the 5-pin thing into your DMX socket and then control the theatre lights with their particular production.
Yeah, absolutely. So DMXis itself is a bit of a defunct software now. It's by a company called Entech, but I think there's lots of sort of cheap ones that you can get. Well, I think the replacement for this is called ShowBuddy, something like that. But yeah, and this is sort of important. So then the next direction for me is I'm actually doing to get the lighting messages and the projection messages into one area. So I think there's programs like QLab and that will actually sort out the cues effectively for all your different immersive elements, let's say. So yeah, so that's what my final live file looks like. So I would have been playing from something like this for say the Earth concert. So just to wrap up, huge opportunities for immersive, and I can't encourage people at some level.
No, it's,
Oh, I thought you were.
actually, well, I did. I think maybe finish this and then we can get to it.
Oh, okay, sure. I can't encourage people enough to get into immersive. It's just one of those areas that is it's exploding. It feels really hot right now. You know, through Ed Acoustics, they've been super generous in supporting me to learn about it as a, you know, not a name, you know, just a DIY artist. But through them, you know, I'm having conversations with kind of all the kind of people in the music industry. So I gave a talk at the BPI just before Christmas and heard people's opinions. There's a lot of people who've been in the industry a long time and be like, oh, I don't really believe in spatial sound. You're just going to have to convince me. And it's like, man, it's also it's sort of leaping forward. There's more and more venues leaping up with spatial sound. Spatial is already in the last 2 generations of your AirPods, whether you like it or not. Lots of stuff is being delivered in spatial sound that you don't even know it's being delivered to you in spatial sound, but that's the standard. It's probably the same conversations when it went from mono to stereo. People who are used to mono and mono recording, some of them are probably a bit resistant to going to stereo. It's like, why do we need that? But I genuinely believe that, particularly with things like, if you're interested in things like VR and AR and stuff in the future, I think it's going to be important to learn as just sort of one of the palette tools that you have. Excellent sound coverage, as mentioned. As I say, it's very, very difficult to measure people's reaction to spatial sound, but I feel like the best compliments I've had have been from when I've done spatial sound concerts. The programming can be quite accessible. You've got binaural monitoring, you don't need the speaker setup at home. Loads of venues. There's even like a coffee shop in Bristol that's just put a D&B soundscape system in their kind of 140 cat room in the back. It's you know, they then it creates a vacuum of content. So anyone doing immersive, like lots of people calling on me who probably shouldn't do, but because it's like, oh, well, who's an artist that's working in spatial? Oh, right, Halina writes, okay, fine. Do you want to get involved with this in a project? And it's kind of like, that's opening lots of doors. So it's an interesting thing to consider. As mentioned, sort of virtual reality and installations. Challenges. There's still a lot of venues that don't have spatial systems and probably aren't going to put them in the near future because it's expensive and then you have to upkeep. To hire it in can be expensive. So, you know, I had an Arts Council grant to help me, but for 2 days, Copeland Gallery at the very beginning was probably about 5k, and that was after a lot of discounting. So it is more expensive, and you know, ticket prices aren't always necessarily going to cover that. There is extra programming input that you need to do. The actual presentation of it possibly a little bit more complex. Ability to manipulate in real time is something that's coming along. So you have people like Max Cooper doing a huge kind of acoustic show at the Brixton Academy just before Christmas, and he was actually sort of throwing sounds around the room. He mapped a whole load of groups of sounds and groups of effects to some faders. So he's just sort of playing, experimenting in that space at the moment. There is a bit of a consideration for size of venue. Once you get a really big venue and you've got a left and a right sort of sounds that relate to each other that are too far apart, you get timing issues. So it's not quite the same as doing just a stereo out or sort of your traditional kind of frontal array. And communication across formats. So I talked about interoperability. Most people are going to release in Dolby because you get the sort of handhold with Apple Spatial, but you might want to play out on an acoustic system. That means you need to do the programming twice, or most artists, someone else needs to do the programming twice. Ideally, you sort of want to hit a button and then tweak it for your new environment. That bridge doesn't exist yet.
Yes, so if I'm, for a live consideration, if I'm touring from venue to venue, one system's got D&B soundscape, one's got acoustics.
Yeah.
Is that another reprogramming issue as well, even down to
So, and I think a lot of big artists who are using it, so you've got people like Bon Iver using it, they'll bring their own sound system, their own PA system with them. So, and you know, Adele Las Vegas residency, that's sort of, but yeah, it's exactly, if you want to go.
There's a trend working against that in terms of environmental friendliness of touring. I can imagine that there's going to have to be some give there.
Well, that's it, and it's really funny. Like even at acoustics, like I'm using an Elisa system next week in Italy to drive a D&B system, so I can do that using a Dante Audio virtual sound card, which is what we're using today. But almost it's kind of like causes a bit of consternation in the top levels of acoustics. It's like, well, you've got your D&B and acoustics being used together. So, but the managing director of acoustics is very open-minded. He's like, we have to. It's like the development of MIDI. You've got to find common language across all of these things. So it's an exciting time in that way because the people who are doing it now are writing the rules of what's going to happen.
Can I ask, just how has working in spatial audio changed the way you write and produce music?
Really interesting question. Yeah. So I think a lot now about what will this sound like live, and I have to be modular in a sense. I do a lot of stereo sites. So I've got 7 UK dates coming up. None of those places have a spatial system, so I have to be able to present stuff, and it has to stand on its own in stereo. So there is a lot of, but if I do this for this, will that work for that? So there's a lot of calculations to make. But I think I've always, in some way, is spatial suitable for how you write and produce music in the first place. It's suitable for me because I'm really into sound design. Some of the stuff I do is not beat driven, it's just kind of sounds coming from all different places. I do some installations, I do some VR stuff. So it's suitable for me because sometimes, from the first instance, I didn't want to just deliver it in stereo, I wanted to deliver it all around the audience. So yeah, there's a good question of, you didn't do spatial just for spatial's sake, you need to do it because it's the materials right for spatial in the first instance. But definitely there's sort of thought process.
Cool.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
Unless you have any questions or
Dolby Atmos is like its own format itself. When you're using the Elisa software, do you ever like bounce files off it or anything sort of similar as if it was like Dolby Atmos or own file itself?
It sort of does the same thing. So format. Yeah, I definitely. If you were going to get into it, I'd definitely go and learn Dolby just because it is the industry standard. And the fascinating thing is, loads of mix engineers are investing in Dolby setups at the moment, however basic, because the record labels just have to do everything in a Dolby Atmos mix right now. So there's loads of work coming in to do that. So strongly recommend.
Yeah, a few years ago I was working with Capital Radio
And stuff, and it's like, it's almost like you don't get work unless you've got a spatial sound setup. And I think that's what's happening right at the core of the industry at the moment. And I think the impact of that hasn't fully been realised by every part of it yet.
So it's a definitely good one for your CV.
I'd say so. Yeah, I think it's just going to get more. I think it's going to get more and more valid. Yeah. Any other questions?
Cool. What's the best routine? What's the best routine? If you were to sort of say, what's your kind of simplest package to start a spatial audio journey? How would you do it? Would you go down the Elisa route?
I'd be honest and say it'd probably be good to get familiar with Dolby. And I think Dolby is integrated into Logic now. We were talking about that earlier. So just play around with that. And I think I'm assuming that gives you that binaural output from there. I don't know. I haven't tried it.
Yeah.
Do that. Try that, and then see if you can rig up a spatial system, or see if you can find someone with a spatial system that you can go and try that out on in live. Yeah.
How many separate speakers would you need to buy for a sort of
for a good spatial setup?
For a good spatial, for a beginner spatial setup, something that you can sort of put it on your CV and say, yeah,
I've done spatial work.
I can do some spatial work.
quadraphonic, surely.
Yeah.
Most basic.
Quadraphonic, but would that get you enough? Would that get you enough work?
I see it's actually literally. I really don't know because I've been lucky because I can work out with either headphones or I go into the acoustic showroom, so I can use their little setup there. But yeah, I don't. I mean, I maybe go and talk to some mix engineers who are doing it already. But I think there's a standard format, isn't there, for Dolby, and it's probably good almost to go there straight away.
Yeah. Just curious, because you've had that experience where you're kind of working at home binaurally with headphones, and then you're taking it into the Elisa space to actually hear it.
Yeah.
How different is that in terms of localization? Like, is it something you thought was here is all of a sudden like over there?
No,
or?
actually, I mean, it's okay. It's different. Like yesterday, I was standing in the middle of the ring of speakers in the showroom, listening to the programming I'd done the day before, and it was kind of like, oh, that's sort of what I meant it to do.
So you find the binaural mix is actually you can trust it in terms of spatialization.
Pretty much, and a lot of it is. I mean, there is some guesswork and not all the same power speed. Keep it within that array, but you can play with sort of more atmospheric sounds around and above. So I did one check in the Halina showroom, and then we did another check in Earth.
Set up your project
Yeah.
and you tweak a few things. Are you essentially the sound
engineer thinks, which is where's the right place for different frequencies to come from. But really lucky, if I work with, in each place I've worked with really highly qualified acoustics engineers, and we'll just listen to it together and I'll go, maybe we need a little bit more on this, or a bit more, or maybe we talk the shelf on this, or whatever. So make it a cooperation and try and do extra sound checks if you can. Yeah.
I'd add to that, in terms of like, if you're a sound engineer, you're supposed to be able to get the equal kind of pink noise anywhere around the venue. So that's the idealistic thing. So, I mean, the one thing that we didn't do, or I didn't do, I'm sorry, is flush out
with
the pink noise.
30 seconds.
Because if I'd had time, we would have just done pink noise in each speakers to make sure that they roughly sounded the same in this room and were the same volume. So the effect obviously would have been a lot better had I had done that, but we ran out of time. I think that's the answer to that really, is the fact that you as the performer, you as the artist, should be able to go into a venue and kind of trust that if you've got a partner like Acoustics, they will have set it up to be as close to full range, nice pink noise sound at all points.
Yes, absolutely, they will have done all of those checks.
But what's that then like for you as a performer, then being on stage and not hearing what
I know.
everyone else is hearing?
Someone else said, weirdly, when I did the installation in Brighton,
thank you.
Thank you. Thanks. In Brighton, in a few weeks' time, I'm doing a station where I'm in the round. So, funny enough, for the first time, I'm at the absolute sweet spot in the middle, and all the speakers are pointing at me, so I get the best show. Yeah.
Good.
But yeah, otherwise you have to sound check and just trust it, the sound engineer, really. Yeah. Cool.
Any other questions? Halina, thank you so much for your time.
Yes.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Can I ask you a few questions? It's going to be quick.
Oh, okay.
How are you? Good?
I need a sound wise. If you can say, hi, I'm Halina Rice, and this is good.
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad.
That's the first one I need.
Okay. Now?
Yeah.
Hi, it's Halina Rice, and I'm
That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. You asked me to do the sound bites from
So you got the stems. Okay.
So
document the sound. Yeah, I've done that. I've done this, and I'm thinking you should ask questions.
Yeah.
How's it going?
But I don't remember. Can you? My phone's dead.
I don't have them. I mean, I don't fit it me. It's too loud.
Is there
I just wanted to get more information on the
thank you.
and see what that's really like.
But I thought we filmed.
It is crazy, isn't it? It's like such a
Yeah.
start thinking about it.
All right, sound bite is fine.
Stereo.
Thanks, Halina. Sorry about it.
Switch it on. Switch it off. Let's restart. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got friends who've done that thing where they've got like Coldplay at some festival and it's going out to like 1 million people on some live broadcast, and then all the Macs just go. It's like, but there's nothing we can do. And there's some director. Why aren't we rolling? Trying to reboot a Mac. Oh my god. Yeah, stress. That is the runaway moment.
That's live for you.
That is live. Yeah, that is live.
Cool. All works.
How big is this room?
Yeah, great. I couldn't believe it. We actually got to the end without it. Where's the complication?
Yeah, I'm just trying to work out the sound thing. Like
The clipping thing.
Yeah.
Oh, it just sounded like buffering.
I think it might be, maybe it's a 24-bit file, and I think the desk is only 16.
The binaural mix coming out of that institute is doing all of those weird calculations.
Exactly,
In a way that you can normally say.
How applicable is the translation? Like how good is the translation from doing it binaural to when you take it live?
Ah, there. Okay.
I really enjoyed that.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah. is filmed.
Yeah, like The Mandalorian.
Yeah. It's all on that crazy kind of.
Yeah.
They're not there, and it's just they're filming a
awesome.
screen, and it's all really clever. And it coordinates with the camera angles, and
Yeah.
that's amazing. He's doing that.
Yeah, he's doing that. And I want to go over basically and work with him. And I've got loads of ideas.